Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for December 15, 2014. We'll begin with the special order calendar decision items. Item number 1, 245-32BZ, 12305 101st Avenue, Queens.
I didn't have any comments with this. on this.
Excuse me.
No.
Anybody else? Okay.
Okay.
Item number 2, 833-52BZ, 591630 Foster Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, the applicant submitted photographs that were supposed to have shown that the fence slats were repaired, but I think they submitted the wrong photographs. They were old ones. So if they could submit, why is there an
He's going to succeed me.
if they could submit the correct photographs, otherwise we'll condition approval on the slats being repaired. Anyone else?
Item number 3, 921-57BZ, 6602 New York Avenue, Brooklyn.
The applicant provided better plans of the parking and planting strip with the vehicle maneuverability shown, and they also reached out to the neighbor about painting the sidewall, but I don't know that there was contact made, but at least they reached out. Any other comments?
Item number 4, 90279BZ, 1096 and 1097-79BZ, and 14803BZ. This is West 28th Street and West 29th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, we just received a note from the Community Board 5 where they identified a partial demolition permit that was issued on one of the other hotels mentioned by them that was in construction at the time of this variance grant. And that partial demo permit was issued in 02 or 03. But even so, they didn't provide any additional information, and it wasn't clear at all. They didn't show any proof that that was cleared for building a hotel. It could have been cleared for any other reason, and in any case doesn't establish that this site was ready at the time to be developed as a hotel. So though I appreciate the submission, I don't see that it changes the story. Anyone else?
Item number 5, 96487BZ, 786 Burke Avenue, the Bronx.
Okay, the applicant revised a statement of fact with respect to the 3 bays, and the photograph shows removal of the banners and revised the site plan to show the specific planting. Any other comments, issues?
Item number 6, 16404BZ, 2241 Westchester Avenue, the Bronx.
In this one, the applicant supplied copies of the DOB approvals for the interior alarm and sprinkler and information about the ECB violation on the HVAC equipment, and a statement that the graffiti has been removed and and if there's new graffiti, promises to remove it ASAP. So that will be one of the conditions of grant, maintain it graffiti-free. Anyone else?
Continued hearing items, item number 7, 16494BZ, 84U Grand Circle, Bronx.
We were asked to adjourn this.
New cases, item number 8, 14292BZ and 28913BZ, 506 and 473 to 541 6th Street, Brooklyn.
This is a case where we were asked to reopen for re-argument the hearing on the Methodist Hospital. In the argument given by the Preserve Park Slope, the applicant, is that there are Moody's rating reports that indicate that the Methodist Hospital is conducting a feasibility study for its project and submitting a certificate of need to New York State. And somehow or other that is linked to the programmatic needs analysis that was before the BSA when it reviewed it. He also adds that there's been an Article 78 filed in July of this year. I understand that we can consider this even though it's an active lawsuit against the board. But my first response is that the Moody's and Fitch reports or the rating reports. Those reports look to the fiscal ability of the hospital to develop its property and have to do with bond issues, completely unrelated to what the board looks at when the board is looking at programmatic needs analysis. And I just want to point out, having been on the other side working on other hospitals, a hospital starts to work on its programmatic needs years before, not months, years before they come to the BSA. They work with architects, programmatic hospital planners. There are many, many different analysts. It's actually hundreds of people working on the analysis of what a hospital needs. And finally, they put it together in forms that are, let's say, understandable to the board because they're extremely, extremely technical. So by the time it comes to the BSA, first of all, they are well along in deciding what it is they need, and they need to be right because the drawings that are approved ultimately by the BSA are the drawings that the Department of Buildings reviews. And in my own direct experience, where the hospital needs to change something about the plans, I worked on one where literally what was on the second floor moved to the third floor, all those programs, and we had to go back to the BSA to get an amendment to the approval because it didn't match the DOB drawings. So even if the hospital were to change its programmatic needs, it would have to come back to the BSA for that. So I don't see any connection at all between a Moody's report that's considering financial feasibility and the very, very long analysis that a hospital goes through to determine its programmatic needs and what was presented to the board. So I don't see any reason for opening this up for re-argument. And as was pointed out by the hospital's representative, a rehearing on the matter is not permitted under the board's rules because the matter was approved as opposed to denied. Any other comments?
I think the original resolution mentioned that there was not a certificate of need when we heard the original argument, so we were aware of that, and it's in the resolution.
Right. And certificate of need is a process that hospitals go through simultaneous with getting other approvals to build the building, and so sometimes they have them before they come to the BSA, sometimes they're received during, and often they're received after the fact. Well,
I fully agree with you. I think that, a statement of programmatic need, what a hospital actually needs to function efficiently, is totally different from a discussion about where they're going to get their financing from, what type of interest rates they're going to have to pay. And I don't think one has anything to do with the other. It has no bearing on the need. The need is still the need, and it's going to be the need going forward, whether or not they could finance all of it at once, finance it in different stages, have different types of financing. Totally unrelated conversation.
I absolutely agree with what's been said. I think that Moody's is looking at something very particular to what their analysis is, which is very different from what our analysis is. They're looking for, the financial ability of an organization, of how that can be, how their projects can be financed, who would finance it. We don't even attempt to go down that road. That's not within our purview. It's not what the board is tasked with looking at. And I do not see, in this instance, a connection between what Moody's would have said even after the fact of our grant with anything that we remotely really look at in terms of program. Mm-hmm.
Appeals calendar, item number 9, continued hearings, 300-088, 3935 27th Street, Queens.
Okay, this is an application for an extension of time to complete construction and obtain a certificate of occupancy. There was an extension that had been granted, I believe in 2010, to continue construction, and construction was not completed by that time. But prior to the board's grant, the owner had been a bad actor and badly managing the site. There were a lot of violations on the site, And the board's resolution made reference to those violations and how the applicant wasn't taking proper care of the site. So it expected that the applicant would do a better job and move forward. So coming to 2014, there has been work done. There's no question that there's been a lot of money put into this site, but at the same time, the history of this owner and how he manages the site has been deplorable. And for example, but undermining adjacent properties to the point where they were on the verge of collapse and where the owner then purchased the properties from the neighboring owners because they were undermined, and damage to many surrounding properties, basically indicating that the owner fails to protect the adjoining property. And there are many open violations. There's stop work orders that have been in effect since 2012 for failure to protect adjoining property, missing construction, fencing, and other protections of adjoining property, dangerous conditions at the property, work contrary to the stop work order, work contrary to approved plans, and open ECB violations. The applicant's representative submitted documents to show that some of the ECB violations had been cured with letters of completion, but there are still other open violations. And so what this says to me is there is this huge rotting shell that is an eyesore that has not been properly developed. And how do you allow a property owner who's a bad actor continue on that? So tomorrow we'll talk about it in more detail, but we have a plan where the owner will have to make extreme measures to persuade the board that he knows how to develop a site and to maintain the property safely and continue construction safely in a way that will protect neighbors and ensure that the building is being built according to construction standards, minimum standards. So we'll talk about that more, all of which will have to be done prior to the board even considering a grant on this application, after which the grant will be for a very limited term so that we can monitor progress on the construction. Commissioner Hinkson, you want to add?
Just to add that I totally agree that the developer has been less than stellar in developing this site. Got at least 2 properties that have been undermined, and it looks like there's probably a third, which resulted in those owners having to sell their property. They could not be re-inhabited. So I think that we need to put forth a plan for the applicant to be able to step up to the plate, and if he wants to continue to develop under our grant, he's going to have to show that, 1, he's capable, but 2, that that there's good faith here in fixing some of these problems, and I don't believe it's without our or outside of our purview to require such measures, to be assured that if we're going to grant someone the ability to continue under previous zoning, which allows him a lot more FAR than would normally at this point be, that that person is going to be able to develop in a way that is safe and does not encroach on his neighbors. So I'm fully behind giving him this push.
Any other comments on that?
Well, they didn't address my questions about serious loss and giving us greater detail as to what can be retained, if anything, under the new zoning, and plus discussion about the diminution of income because of what remains, or what would be allowed under the new zoning.
Right. Yes, I wanted to add some other things that were not provided that we specifically asked for. As of December 10th, there's a stop work order on the property and 5 open ECB violations, plus 1 DOB work without a permit violation. We need backup information on that. All of those violations need to be cured before there's any consideration, and it has to be maintained violation-free during this whole process. The applicant was asked to provide photos and costs of the status of construction as of today's date, and did not. The last photos are from April 2014. The cover letter from the applicant refers to DOB amended and approved plans that include the adjacent site subject to M12 R5B. The only set we were provided with was a set approved by DOB in 2013. The applicant was asked to provide copies of the plans originally filed with the 2010 BSA approval of the vesting application. We did not receive that. The applicant was also asked to compare in the statement of facts the 2010 plans to those approved by DOB in 2013. That adds the smaller lot that is subject to the M12 R5B Long Island City Special Purpose District. They didn't do that. The applicant was asked to discuss the project progress of work and the extent to which it was going on in violation of the stop work order since the 2010 BSA approval. Did not do that. The applicant was asked to show on the plans compliance with the Long Island City regulations for the portion of the building subject to the M12 R5B. There's no mention of that special district on the drawings. So all of those things need to be addressed before we can really consider going on with this application. Commissioner Montanez, did you have
Nothing
more?
else to add?
New cases, item number 10, 6514A through 8814A, Lemon Drop and Apricot Court, Staten Island.
So this is an application for construction of a little development, essentially, for properties that don't front on legally mapped streets. I note that we have received fire department sign off with a condition that the minimum curb-to-curb street width shall be 34 feet as indicated on the drawings, that all buildings must be fully sprinklered, and that the main entrance to all dwellings shall be on the side of the building facing the street with no rear main entrances. We have the DEC wetlands permits with restrictions on development that must be adhered to. And my comment is in terms of how this development works. This is 24 houses built on either sides of two dead-end roads that don't have a cul-de-sac, so there's no turnaround. But the fact that it's 34 feet wide, I'd probably like drivers to comment on this because I'm not much of one. But it does provide also planting beds at the curb and 4-foot wide sidewalks, so there really is a kind of an urban character to it. I do have a question about the tandem parking. I just would like a little clarification on that. How does that work when you have a two-family house? Unless only 4 of the homes are two families, maybe it's 5 homes. The DEC permit says it's 5. The statement of fact says it's 4. I don't actually know which is which, so that needs to be corrected. And I'm just, curious about how this tandem parking works when you have 2 families. Do they each have keys to the other guy's car, et cetera?
I agree with what you've said about the 30-foot wide street. I just had a question of how you actually turn around at the end, because it sort of forces you to go on someone else's property that, unless you can really make that turn in a sort of a tight circle. So I had a question about that. I also wanted to know if the applicant could provide us maybe street level photos as well as sort of above. They've given us sort of that bird's eye view, which is great because you can see the entire site, but you don't get a sense of what it's like on the ground. So if they could do that, that would be great.
Okay. Anybody else?
In terms of the parking, for the 2 families, they'd actually be required to provide 3. So I guess 1 would be in a garage and 2 would be in tandem in the side yard. So I guess theoretically, 1 person could have the garage and the other 2 would be part of the same family and be able to move each other in and out.
That would work if they agree. Okay. Okay, any other? No?
Item number 11, 11314A, 86 Bedford Street, Manhattan.
This is an appeal seeking revocation of a permit issued that allowed a non-conforming use eating and drinking establishment to resume after
Commissioner
discontinuance.
Hinkson,
One second.
Vice Chair. Just she needs
I
to
need to
indicate her.
recuse. I actually recused from 11 and 12, so from 113 and 128. So I'll be back.
It's okay.
I'm so used to doing that myself.
It's been a while.
It's been a while, it has. Anyway, getting back to 86 Bedford Street, we have seen this before. This is the site of Chumley's. And it's an appeal seeking revocation of a permit issued by the building department that allowed the continuance of an eating and drinking establishment at this site. And the applicant states that there had been over a two-year discontinuance, and that the eating and drinking establishment should not have been permitted to proceed. So, do we have any opening comments on that? I've got some issues, but I'll open it up to you guys
I guess the
first.
standard is the sign case with Chin, that it had to be an interruption of protected nonconforming use compelled by legally mandated, duly permitted, and digitally completed repairs. And I think during the original hearing, the DOB came in and didn't feel that that was the case. And during the course of the hearing, they felt that they changed their mind and they agreed that it did comply with those three items. And we received a lot of engineering reports, payment requisitions, drawings, plans, stop work orders, landmarks approvals, which showed that from the beginning, all of this had been either mandated or required by DOB and LPC. And the DOB concluded that it was diligently pursued, and they withdrew the revocation of the permit. And I know I was convinced that it met the standard.
I agree with you. I was interested to see that the applicant had made a distinction between when the permits were filed and for what. And I'd like the applicant to be able to explain that a little bit further. It seemed that he was saying that, well, there were permits for the structural work, but that was separate from the application that actually continued the use of the eating and drinking, because that sort of came later in the process. And I'm wondering if the applicant can give me a little more on that. I don't particularly see that there is a procedural difference there that would make the difference in the two-year discontinuance. That's really administrative. If the building department tells you to file in a certain way, you file in a certain way. You don't necessarily put it onto one particular application that has to do with the use of the building.
Right.
So I think that the applicant needs to explain that a little bit further. Commissioner Otley Brown?
Well, I feel that we spent a lot of time in the first appeal actually reviewing the sequence of events, and I felt very convinced by the appellant in that case that the sequencing of all of the different repairs was really determined by Department of Buildings, and therefore I felt that they did meet the standard that was set forth in Chin. So.
I would also like the applicant to discuss a little bit. He makes a distinction in the Fifth Avenue case about the sign not being real property, but he also talked about that the holding in that case sort of turned on the concept of a taking. And I thought that was interesting because you tend to think of real property as a taking, but he says that the sign isn't necessarily property, real property. This is real property, and one would then make the case that if it's real property, then the concept of a taking would apply here, and that the government, in its action with the owner, in a sense, took over the property over a certain period of time and caused perhaps the owner to lose certain property rights. So I thought there was a little bit of a disconnect, so if he can talk about that.
And that it would include the use of the site.
And it would include the use of the site,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay.
Item number 12, 12814A, 47 East 3rd Street, Manhattan.
This is an appeal that challenges DOB's determination that a proposed off-street loading berth is not accessory to a medical office. The applicant has a medical office, I guess, on their first floor, and they've got a loading berth that they say is should be included in the use of the medical office. And DOB has said that that's not a use that's customarily found with medical offices. And they give us some examples of use group 4 locations that don't necessarily have loading berths, while the opposition or the applicant has said that, you know, they can cite just as many sites that have loading berths. So, and in this case, I guess the loading berth is actually two stories and is kind of large in comparison to the use of the medical office. So, any comments on this?
Well, I think that you know, DOB's response is not only that they feel that it is not incidental and customarily found, but they also feel that the size relationship between the loading berth and this medical office is not seen at all in the city. And so they talk about the relative size, and they're saying that in this case, the loading berth takes up 33% of the floor area that would be attributable to the medical office, and that ordinarily, because loading berths aren't required in medical offices unless they're over 10,000 square feet, if they took the minimum medical office that would require a loading zone, that would only be a small percentage of the space if it were at that same size. And then they also respond to the appellant's argument, because the appellant then shows all of these examples of what they say are loading zones, and DOB makes a distinction between the loading berth and accessory parking for loading purposes, and they respond that all of the appellant's examples are actually accessory parking spaces used for loading. And I actually was convinced by that portion of the argument. I didn't see any of those examples that actually showed loading zone / berths. It really was parking for people who are visiting the medical office, which leads me to believe that perhaps, you know, this might be parking that would be either for the medical office or the primary use of the building.
Well, I would like the applicant to finalize the dimensions, because the dimensions are like all over the place. And I kind of felt that if you can consider a radio antenna accessory to a residential home, then I didn't feel it was much of a stretch to think of a loading berth as accessory to a medical office, because they're not commonly found, but it could be found. So I just wanted to know a little bit more about the dimensions. I guess there is not a medical office there yet. It's not like the building has a C of O with the medical office. They're in the process of construction. I would feel a little bit better if the medical office was in operation. And I was a little mystified by the term loading berth. You think of a loading berth as associated to a commercial or manufacturing property and not necessarily a small medical office. And why didn't they just call it an off-street, you know, parking space or something besides a loading berth? What triggered it to become a loading berth?
I sort of agree with you on that. It wasn't clear to me exactly what the loading berth really meant. And it was not clear as to sort of the operation of this loading berth, why it needed to be 2 stories. They talk about they needed clearance, but why do you need, once you've made it underneath, you know, the entry, why do you need, you know, so much volume? nobody really talked about, well, an ambulance going to pull up, and then, somebody gets the person out, and DOB talked about orthopedic surgeons, but this is I guess a spinal surgeon, somebody who deals with people who have had spinal injuries, I assume. And if their type of patient comes in a different manner, I think maybe they should start to explain that a little bit. Maybe they're not able to walk, I don't know. So there were some gaps, and I think maybe we should find out a little bit more about the operation.
Right, also, why it wouldn't be enough that they have the handicap lift that goes to the ground
Right.
floor, and that there's no standing except trucks loading and unloading right in front of the apartment building, why that doesn't suit their purposes. Would
Exactly.
also be helpful.
Exactly. All right, okay. Guess we can call Marjorie back. Oh, here she is.
Okay, item number 13, 192, 198, 14A, Winslow Place, Staten Island. This is also a GCL.
Okay, right, this is also a development of 7 single-family homes with 2 parking spaces, fully sprinklered on one side of a 34-foot wide private road, but it's just on one side. I didn't have as much issue with the turnaround there because it's just one side, but I don't really know whether that's a problem still about people driving into each other's driveways. There is no cul-de-sac. But there is actually, the road continues a little bit past people's houses, so I don't know whether that improves the turnaround capability. Again, need drivers to comment on that. And otherwise, I had no other issues.
Did we get fire department
Not yet.
Not yet.
approval? No, okay.
And could they also give us sort of street-level photos as well?
No.
Zoning calendar, decision items, item number 14, 2-13BZ, 438 Targi Street, Staten Island.
Okay, no issues with this one. Anyone else?
No.
Item number 15, 119 14BZ, 1151 3rd Avenue. This is for the second and third floor.
No issues with this?
Item number 16, 120 14BZ, 1151 3rd Avenue. This is for the fifth floor.
No issues with this.
Item number 17, 121 14BZ, 1151 3rd Avenue, Manhattan. This is for the fourth floor.
No issues.
Okay. Item number 18, 151 14BZ, 19 West 21st Street, Manhattan.
No issues with this one. Anyone else?
No.
Okay. Item number 19, 208 14BZ, 119 East 77th Street Road
Okay,
in
this is one
Queens.
of- I'm sorry. This is one of the Build It Back applications from HPD. Then the neighbor at hearing had requested that the building, the prototype building, be moved forward 8 feet to preserve better the rear yard, and we received a letter from HPD stating that the building would be moved. It was withdrawn? Again?
Yeah,
It was withdrawn.
this was withdrawn this
Oh, I'm
morning.
sorry. Okay, I didn't get that note. Withdrawn completely. Okay.
Continued hearing items, item number 20, 286 12BZ, 1925 Union Street, Brooklyn.
Okay. Okay, sorry. No need to objections. Okay. So the applicant on this one states that no rear yard waiver is required since the building is within 100 feet of the intersection of Portal and Union Street. However, I note from this that Portal has a frontage, the building has a frontage on Portal of 108 feet, so 8 feet of that frontage would be a shallow interior lot that may require a rear yard, therefore a waiver, because it's kind of a very strange little triangle. That would not apply if the entire street frontage for the block is 230 feet wide or less. So the applicant should check that to see whether a rear yard waiver is needed. And then, is this one? Sorry. No need to amend the DOB since lot coverage on older, I don't understand. Sorry.
Well, they're saying the only waiver they require is for lot coverage.
Right, but there isn't any need to amend, even if there's only a lot coverage waiver, you don't need to amend the objection because we just aren't going to grant on those other things, so you can leave it alone. So, and then the zoning sheet says that a setback waiver is also required. The drawings don't provide information on height and setback requirements and whether the building complies. We need to have that. And the zoning sheet says a setback waiver is required. Is a setback waiver required? Is the zoning sheet incorrect? There needs to be a coordination of the drawings and the zoning and the statement of facts. Also, the drawings are very basic, so we can't tell anything about the impact of this building on the surrounding neighborhood. We need more design information about the building and more images on neighborhood impact, like photographs of the block streetscape and how this building will sit in the streetscape. And though I understand it's a lot coverage waiver, it's still, once it's here, we want to see that the project will actually contribute to the neighborhood, not just be there. So, any other comments?
Well, during the prior hearing, I had asked about the building, the 2 additional floors adjacent to the north property line, and if they couldn't step that in a little bit to provide more light and air for the residential buildings to the rear.
Right, okay.
And they had done an analysis thinking that they had to demolish the existing first two floors and set everything back, but I was really only thinking about the 3rd and 4th floor, and there is a row of columns parallel to that wall, which I felt that they could use for part of the supporting wall, and when you look at the floor plans, there's just so much open area that I didn't really feel that they would lose a lot of program, and I'm still not completely convinced of that.
No? I just wanted to add that there was a Phase 2 submitted, and the Phase 2 recommended that there be a remedial action plan and a health and safety plan prepared. This is a contaminated site and needs a vapor barrier and a subslab depressurization system. The submission justified why they used the Hudson Yards FEIS for trip generation data for a church in Brooklyn, so they're not nearby. And they responded to the board's request about relocating the north wall at the addition to pull it back from the property line. That's what you had requested.
Yes, right.
So are you not satisfied with?
Well, they're talking about excessive cost, but I'm not sure if they're only considering the 3rd and 4th floor where there's an existing line of columns, or if they're still considering demolishing the 2 existing floors, which I would not consider
see.
necessary.
Okay, okay.
And I would like them to explain a little bit in terms of what's required for the sub-slab depressurization system and the vapor barrier, because I don't believe they're removing the ground floor slab.
Right, yeah, right. How do they do
So
that?
what do they actually have to do?
Right, okay. Great. Anyone else? That's it, thank you.
Item number 21, 34312BZ, 570 East 21st Street, Brooklyn.
Okay. This submission, with respect to this submission, the applicant supplied us a statement of facts that has a very clear programmatic requirement statement, although the breakdown of each need was not provided in that statement. It says how many bedrooms are needed, but not the number and sizes of the other rooms and on what that's based. It very helpfully provided a typical school day for several different students to understand how the rooms function and how a student would be sort of managed during the day because it's complex. They also provided a parking and traffic study showing extremely minimal car use for the facility with only 25 staff and 25 children who arrive in 2 minibuses and an ambulette, so very limited impact in terms of parking. My comments are that though they provided many studies to support the concept of the program, but it would have been really more helpful to this case had the applicant reviewed the materials and written an executive summary of each article. So there was a booklet that was like an inch and a half that was submitted with lots and lots of articles about educating children with these kinds of disabilities. I read some of the articles, but it was impossible to read all of them. And not being a specialist, it would have been a lot better if there had been a paragraph on each article and what the conclusion was. That way we could learn more quickly and perhaps more concisely what sort of the point is of each article and how that supports the argument. In particular, the backup material in the submission refers to educational programs for children on mobile ventilators who attend public school or presumably private school, but in other words, they're not in special schools. In addition to children who are home-based educated, I'd like the applicant to discuss how the proposed program will work compared to the public school placement and the home-based schooling. Like, is this filling a gap that exists, or is it creating a new model? Because the articles actually seem to indicate, and granted, I can only read some of the articles, that there are children who are too sick to leave home, and so therefore they have to be schooled at home, presumably with tutors or various parental support. And then there are the children who manage to graduate to these mobile ventilators and can go to public school, and then eventually they don't even need those ventilators. And so where do the children who are going to be participating in this program, where do they fit into that spectrum? And are there these children? And also, from the point of view of just the form of the building, there's a really shallow rear yard, and I'd like to see drawings that show the impact of the shallow rear yard on the neighbors in the block plan, and to show photographs of that. And if you pulled back from those rear yards a little bit to give more space to the neighbors, what would that do to the programmatic requirements? I think those are my comments. Anyone else?
I just with the great amount of information that they gave us, which I thought was great, and I too did not finish reading everything because it's 100 and change pages, but I got through most of it, a good 90 some odd pages. But I would like them also not only to maybe, if they can work in some sort of summary, but also to translate some of that information onto their drawings to make sure that that there's a real correlation between all of that programmatic information and what's given on the drawing and the notes on the drawing to substantiate what was in the report, to make sure that both coincide. That was the first thing. And I also think they need to then revamp their facts and findings so that it reflects everything in that report. And I don't think that they answered the question of, did they need to go to city planning on this? Is this the type of facility? I don't think that they
I don't
actually
think they responded to that.
Right, I would like them to explain why they're applying to us as a school instead of to city planning as a health care facility. So,
That they perhaps
That they
reached
feel
that
it's-
far, and they should discuss why they don't.
right,
Well, then that's going back to what the neighbors are saying, which is that it's a hospital.
right,
But the fact is that there's educational activities that go on here, and the students live there because they're so ill that they need to be on site all the time. That's the premise of the program, right?
right.
But you're thinking that then maybe it fits in the category of nursing home or something like that?
Well, a healthcare facility, I believe, in an R1-2, R1 or R2 needs to go to city planning. So the opposition seems to think that they're skirting around that requirement. So if they could just explain why it's more appropriate to come here, I would be satisfied.
Okay.
I reviewed the traffic study, and I am just a little bit skeptical because it's it does state that there's going to be a minimal impact on the neighborhood, but that's based on the fact that there are only going to be 16 vehicle trips per day going in the morning and out in the afternoon during the peak period. And part of that 16 trips has to do with transporting 25 children and equipment. And they're stating that they're going to be transporting them in 2 minibuses and 1 ambulance. 10 children per minibus and 5 children in the ambulance. And my question is, don't these children have equipment that they're traveling with, and are they really going to fit into a minibus and an ambulance? So if they could please give me more information as to what these children travel with, that would help convince me that this is more accurate a study.
It's also questionable in terms of then why are they providing 40 parking spaces? If there's only 16 vehicle trips.
Well, I think they stated that some of those spaces are for visiting family and friends, so that they will be taken care of. And they also say that there'll be 3 truck deliveries per week, but they don't state what type of trucks, box trucks, large trucks, and that would be important to know.
So then the visitors should be factored into the traffic analysis too.
Right.
And so should drop-offs, truck drop-offs. Right.
And do those truck drop-offs happen within the building? Like, the kids get, are taken off of the buses inside, but, if you've got a big box truck, filled with whatever, that may not happen. So can they describe what happens with real deliveries?
Item number 22, 350-12BZ, 5 32nd Street, Brooklyn. We have an adjournment request.
Oh, adjournment.
Right.
How did I get this? Okay. That's 350-12, 32nd Street, right?
Right.
Correct.
Item number 23, 254-13BZ, 2881 Nostrand Avenue, Brooklyn.
So with this one, the applicant provided drawings with an improved design, let's just say improved, and landscaping details. So I think it's a better project than it was before. It's not, going to win any awards, but it's a better project. Just for one recommendation, though, the ground floor units, some of them are on the street, directly on the street, and just I'd recommend that there be entries to those ground floor units directly from the street. That would enliven the street activity and reduce the apparent length of the building, and has an added beneficial effect on the interior because you can eliminate that corridor that connects to those units, or a part of the corridor because you have a fire stair in there.
I would like a little bit more detail on the landscaping. They show these green areas with circles, but I don't really know what, and they didn't put the street trees on the site plan. So if they could provide, what type of landscaping, that would be
And
helpful.
street trees.
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else?
Item number 24, 9414BZ, 1150 East 22nd Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, with this one, the statement of facts states that the building, sorry, let me just get that, no, I'm sorry. The revised statement of facts does address the illegal construction at the rear, otherwise known as the undocumented, is that construction? It's a nice phrase. And revised, the zoning analysis was revised, and a hand-drawn streetscape of the block was provided. I find that the streetscape drawing is helpful, but it really doesn't give us an idea of the actual neighborhood character to determine whether this proposal is in character, because we don't experience streets in elevation. Architects experience streets in elevation, but people don't. So we really need a visual on this, photos. So the project manager can give examples of how this is done for other projects, but basically the standard approach has been to take a photograph of each house on the block and on both sides of the block, which I assume was done already to do the elevations. And then you just piece them together, which can literally be, if you're digitally minded, they're pieced together digitally. If not, you cut and paste them like in the old days. Just need to make sure that they're all at the same scale, and you cut and paste them, and then you take the drawing of the proposal and you insert that. And since this architect is skillful at drawing, you could even do something that's a little bit with perspective, so that it's matching the perspective taken from the other houses. That's a great way to argue for the height and form of the building. One of the reasons that I'm saying that is because there's this sort of, on one side, there's a dormer that in elevation looks at a scale with the rest of the house and with the neighbors. So maybe that's not how it's experienced. Maybe it's actually further back and so on. Also, we asked the applicant to justify the reduction of the rear yard from 24 feet to 20 feet. And the way that's done is that you provide a block plan that shows the adjoining properties and how deep those rear yards are. And if there are buildings in the rear, such as garages, that those are one-story buildings, or if you know the height, the actual height of those buildings, that helps to make the argument for what you might put in this rear yard that's getting smaller, and also to provide a 360 view of the rear yard, which can either be taken from the roof, which is the ideal of the subject building, or from the yard itself, so that we can understand what the impact of extending the yard will be, extending the building into the yard will be on adjoining properties. Anyone else?
I think the statement's been revised, but there's still, there's a large error in it. There's a statement about how many special permits have been granted within 400 feet of the site, and there's a little table, but the table I've received is actually incomplete. There's FAR information, but there's no square footage information. There's just like commas and 3 zeros, and then there's part of the BZ information in terms of the year that's granted, but no BZ number, and there are no addresses other than just the general street. So I assume that this is being given to us to show us that there are other comparable sized properties in the area. And also some of the FARs aren't even filled out. It's like East 23rd Street, 0 FAR. East 21st Street, 0 FAR.
It was submitted incomplete, unless there's been another one, which I haven't seen.
There has been?
No, I haven't seen it.
Okay.
Okay, anybody else?
New cases. Item number 1, 6314BZ, 5500 Broadway, the Bronx.
Okay, I understand that there's been no Department of Investigation sign-off yet, that they didn't receive the PCE forms, so those should be resubmitted to the DOI for expedited sign-off. That's something the applicant does?
No, we do.
We do it, okay, so we need to do that, okay. Okay, we didn't receive, okay. So there's a little bit of delay because we didn't get the DOI sign-off. The fire department says that they need a submission on the fire alarm and the sprinkler documentation, because there's a statement that there is a fire alarm and sprinkler, but the fire department needs some kind of proof that it's there. Other than that, any other comments?
I just had a comment about, they make a note that there's a cellar use only and no floor area anywhere else, but I think they actually have some floor area at the grade, at the first floor, right?
Right.
To get in. So
Yes.
they need to actually count that in with the stair.
They have massage rooms on the plan, so if there is massage, they should give their license, because I think they might be actually open.
Astro? Yeah, they're open. Oh, yeah,
So
they've been open for a
in that
while.
case, they should have a license.
But so this is, yeah, it's legalization,
Yeah,
right.
they've been open for a while.
And they should add the standard BSA notes to the plans.
Okay.
Item number 2, 11814BZ, 1891 Richmond Road, Staten Island.
Okay, this is variance to allow 3-story, 16-unit condominium in an R3X, R12 split zoning district in Staten Island. The site is in a very restricted location. One half of the site is an area of no disturbance, so it cannot be built. And then the rest of the entirety of the site is affected by being up against this very high cliff. So the development area is extremely limited. And I think from my perspective, the case has been well made that the amount of retaining walls that need to be built are extremely costly, and also that it reduces further the usable space, so you don't actually have a backyard to speak of. You can look at it, but you can't really get there without hiking shoes. The one of the hardships that's listed, though, is a 10-foot wide sewer easement at the rear, which was an easement that was granted to the properties to the rear of that. And I don't really see how that can count as a hardship, because that is a predecessor in title making a deal to sell a sewer easement. However, I don't see in the financials that the effect of the sewer easement factors in at all. So it doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect the analysis. And that was, let's see. And a note that there was also a 2004 CPC authorization to allow development of 4 detached 2-family homes. And so they're going to need to modify that approval, because that's where the area of no disturbance was analyzed, essentially determined. So that will need to be modified, and they've only had a meeting with city planning about this. They haven't gotten the approval yet. Okay, and so let me see. Okay, and then the other comment that was made about a unique physical condition was that the site is oddly shaped because it's wider than deeper. I didn't find that. It's actually a good thing. You have more frontage, you can build lots of different kinds of buildings where it's wider than deeper. It's easy for construction equipment to get to a wider than deeper site. So I didn't understand why that was even put in there, but again, I don't think it makes a bit of difference because it wasn't factored into the costs. So it's just kind of throwing that in just in case, so we don't need that. And then there were analyses of other vacant sites and to determine that this one is unique. And the ones that were sort of excluded as not as burdened as this one, a couple of them were described as having ownership in conjunction with another parcel. And I didn't understand how that made them better sites than this one. I just didn't understand what they were getting at, so that if they could explain that more. The statement of findings makes reference to another development in the area with detached homes, stating that they did not face the same subsurface conditions, but there's no backup for that information. And then the statement of facts actually talks about the excavation costs being more, or excavation and retaining wall costs being more expensive when you're doing it for individual homes, because you have to do more retaining walls, more foundations, more something. So it leads you to believe that it would be a higher cost than just simply taking the retaining wall cost for the larger building and dividing it by 8. So if that's not the case, then that should be removed from the statement of facts, because there's this kind of, I was reading along thinking that instead of $109,000 for excavation and retaining walls on the individual homes, it would be more because there's a premium for doing more. But maybe that's not the case, in which case that should be removed. Also, the statement of finding concludes that only one waiver for use is required, while the statement of facts states that a waiver for height is needed. And when you look at the drawings, there is a height exceeding the maximum of 35 feet. The statement of findings and facts mentions not one time how you justify that height. which needs to be, you need to support that with the reason for the increased height and findings. There's probably reasons that the attic needs to be taller to compensate for something, or the form of the building is affected by the fact that you can only build on this portion of the lot, or something. So that needs to be developed. On the basement plan, this is just a question about the plan, there appear to be entrances to the garage both from the side and directly from the street underneath the building, under the arches. Is that actually how it's done? Because I didn't see curb cuts on both locations. I'm not really sure what those arches are for. Is that for access for pedestrians? Didn't really understand what that is. And if they're open, are they going to be closed with garage doors? Because it seems to me to be kind of an odd thing to not have it be enclosed. On the as-of-right site plan, that isn't actually the as-of-right site plan. It's labeled BSA 7 site plan as approved by CPC. It indicates that only 4 two-story, one-family homes, not 6 one-family and 5 two-family, as are described in the CPC approval letter. So we actually need the real drawings that were approved by city planning, not a drawing of those drawings, because there's a disconnect someplace between the approval and what was submitted. And then I just had, finally, I thought the feasibility analysis was really excellent, was really clear. It had good support and, to my mind, reasonable values for land costs and unit sales. It shows a negative return for the as-of-right and a 7.7 return for the proposed, which I thought was reasonable for a development of this type in the area. Anybody? Commissioner Otley-Brown?
I only had one question for the financials. I agree with you that I thought largely they were fine, and it just had to do with the site value, which was based on the land sales for developable R3X space versus undevelopable R3X space, which made sense. However, part of this site is R1-2, and there are no R1-2 sales of either developable land or land that can't be developed. So my question is, where is the R1-2 in terms of what could be developed on and what can't be, and will that have an impact on the site value? And they can just answer that in terms of the paragraph, the narrative.
Any other comments?
Regarding the site value, I think they just gave a site value for vacant land with no improvements. And if you go to the site, there's actually part of the retaining wall already constructed, I assume either by the person who developed above to protect their sewer or someone. So I was just wondering, how are the existing retaining walls, how do they factor into the financial analysis?
What I understood was that as part of that other application that was approved by city planning, they had begun work
Some
on
work,
the retaining walls.
Right.
So then that's something to discuss about how you factor that work done, which I think was may have been done by this owner or predecessor in title. I just don't know, but I think it was done on this side of the property line as opposed to the neighbor doing it.
Okay, and then in the as-of-right analysis, I didn't see why they didn't use what was approved by city planning in the as-of-right analysis, which is 11 homes instead of 8.
11 homes, but how many units? I think the goal was to get 16 units.
Well, it was 5, two-family, that's 10, so it's 16, it's the same
Yeah.
number of units.
Right.
But I think in terms of selling a home, it might be a different, analysis.
That single families sell differently than two families?
Well, they're not half of a two-family. Mm-hmm. They may be 3/4 the price of a two-family, so it might be a little bit better return. Mm-hmm. And I had some questions regarding the attic. There is no attic floor area counted, and they're using the 20% attic allowance to bump up their FAR to 0.6. And in the lower growth management district. It doesn't have to be directly below the roof. It has to be below a sloping roof, which requires a certain slope. And I just wanted a little explanation about why no attic floor area was counted, especially since it seems rather large, a large space up there. Is it going to be used for anything? And is it partially because of these special requirements in the lower growth management district to get the 20% allowance? And how that figures into the design?
I was thinking that to obtain that slope that you need to be able to get your 20%, that might have contributed to the height of the building, that he actually, so it sort of bumped it up a bit.
But, yes, but when you look at it in section, the roof really kind of flattens out, so that was part of my,
In the-
yeah, so. And just if they're going to use that space up there, it's a nice-looking space.
But how are they going to use that?
Right.
Okay. Okay.
Item number 3, 12414BZ of 11112 Gilmore Court, Brooklyn.
Sorry. Computer glitch. Sorry. Okay. So, the zoning analysis versus the statement of facts have different perimeter wall heights, so that needs to be coordinated. I can't tell from the submission whether the proposed height and depth of the rear yard is consistent with neighborhood character. We need a streetscape photo montage, which inserts the proposed project into the montage, and we need rear yard plan analysis showing the depth of the adjoining rear yards and the heights of the structures on the adjoining properties, and include a photo of the rear yard taken 360 from the subject rear yard, or ideally from the roof of the subject. The statement of fact states that the 20-foot rear yard, lot coverage, and shallow side yards are permitted pursuant to zoning resolution section 73-622. I want to underline that this is incorrect, such a statement. This 73-622 is a special permit, and if the findings are met, it can be granted. If the findings are met, it can grant certain waivers to the extent that these are not permitted as of right, but a finding needs to be made that has to do with neighborhood character. And in particular, there's an inaccurate statement. It says that with respect to the proposed increase in the perimeter wall height, that this is permitted under 73-622. That's not the case. It only is permissible if a particular finding is met, which I don't believe that this one meets, or if it does, there's been no demonstration that it meets. And that is, you can increase the height of the perimeter wall only where the enlarged building is adjacent to a single or two-family detached or semi-detached residence with an existing non-complying perimeter wall facing the street. The increased height of the perimeter wall of the enlarged building shall be equal to or less than the height of the adjacent building's non-complying perimeter wall facing the street, measured at the lowest point before a setback or pitched roof begins. So that needs to be established before the ask is even possible. And then I just add that this is a very huge ask with respect to additional floor area. FAR, with only one lot in the study area with as much as is asked for here, and not clear whether that was permitted under anything. And really, there's no justification for that much floor area. And I note that there were no zoning calculations provided for each floor, so it's just a big collected, I don't know, huge amount of floor area. Any other comments?
I too had questions about their floor area study of the area, that they don't really talk about why those buildings may be larger than the norm, or if they're permitted to be larger. I also have questions about the layout of the building. The attic has what I think is a somewhat unworkable bedroom situation where you've got this sort of long, skinny plan with severely raked roofs, and there's like no room for anyone to, actually stand up in the room except for like a 4-foot sort of like long corridor in the room. So I'm not sure that the plan actually works. I also had questions about the adjacent property's got this court, this inner court. And I'd like to know if there's any agreement that there's a portion of their, of the applicant's property that is supposed to remain open because of that court on the adjacent property, because effectively, they're going to be closing it off. They've got steps that raise the elevation of that side yard and then go back down, or I guess it's the opposite, it actually goes down and then comes back up. But that will affect whatever is going on in that interior court. So if they could talk a little bit about that, and if there's anything that would affect that court. I think that was...
With respect to that, I'd like to be sure if the applicant could bring in their notice to that particular neighbor, to the adjoining neighbors, so that we know that they were notified and had an opportunity to speak here, because I don't know that, we've learned that neighbors are finding out about these applications kind of late, like maybe they don't really live there or something, and then they find out too late that, that there was something going on adjacent that's affecting them, so.
I also have reservations about this meeting the character finding. And, I looked at their lot study, and out of 400-foot radius, only 35 homes have an FAR greater than 1, but only 4 have an FAR greater than 1.5, and only 1 has an FAR greater than 1.73. So now there really is only one other home. And then when they show us, the statement about the buildings being as large as this one, they state there are 3 buildings that are as large as this building, but those buildings are on larger lots, and only one of them is a home. So, I think they have to go a lot further to convince me that this would be within the character neighborhood.
Right, and if anything, they should go to some of the recent approvals in this area for guidance in terms of what we considered acceptable.
Okay, thank you.
Item number 4, 16814BZ, 419 Lafayette Street, Manhattan.
Okay, so with this one, I note that there will have a sprinkler and fire alarm linked to the building's main fire alarm. There's been a certificate of no effect from landmarks issued for the interior work, and if they need any exterior work and signage, they'll apply to LPC for a certificate of appropriateness. We have the DOI response, and we still need fire department sign off. We have it? Oh, we have fire department sign off. And a fire safety narrative was provided. My only questions really are, what is the use on the second floor? Because this is going to be on the ground level, and so I'm always concerned about the noise that projects up to the second floor. And so I'd like the applicant to talk about the information on sound attenuation measures to prevent the transmission of noise and vibration to the second floor. Any other comments?
Item number 5, 17714BZ, 1038 Flatbush Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. And this one, we do have fire department and Department of Investigation sign off. They will have a sprinkler and fire alarm system connected to the central station. Again, the plans show that this proposed PCE occupies part of the first floor, so I'd like to know what the adjacent uses are, but I note that that probably isn't an issue because of the way that the plan is laid out. The weight room is separated from the adjacent space by reception and locker areas. However, the cardio room is above an adjacent use, so that's where there might be an impact. So what is that adjacent use? And therefore, there should be some information on how the perimeter walls and ceilings will be treated to prevent vibration and noise penetration to adjacent uses. Anybody else?
Just that they had a stop work order in 2014 for work contrary to plans, and if that was related to their work, and what's the status?
Item number 6, 18414BZ, 1-37 Street, 1-37, 12th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay. This one's kind of interesting. I'd love to hear the history just out of curiosity, but there was a city planning restrictive declaration filed against this property that limits the use of the third floor to office or warehouse use, so the applicant needs to get approval from city planning to amend the restrictive declaration, so that would obviously have to be done before any work could actually be done on this. We're waiting for community board decision still, yes? Did we receive the community board decision? Oh, we have it? We don't have, we're still waiting for the community board decision. Fire department signed off, and we have the Department of Investigation response. I think there's a mistake in the operational plan, unless this is a kind of an unusual facility. It says it's open from 4:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. Seems kind of like a short day. Even though you must be really tired because you're opening at 4:30 a.m. Also verify that the peak hours are from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. because that seems like a pretty long peak. I'd be exhausted at the end of such a long peak day. And then those were my only comments. Anyone else?
Item number 7, 18514BZ, 14 Wall Street, Manhattan.
So I just wanted to understand, is this a legalization? The community board says that it is, and it doesn't seem to indicate that in the statement of facts. So can we get some clarity on that? Also, apparently there's a gym on the first and second floor, or at least there was one approved in 2000. I just like to know whether there's a gym in this floor. This is for a spa, so it's not a competitor. Also, is there signage proposed for this spa? If yes, provide the elevation of the ground to second floors, not the entire building, just the ground to second floors, showing compliance with the signage regulations, and we have sign-offs from Fire Department and Department of Investigation. Any other comments?
No.
Item number 8, 28514BZ through 28814BZ, 84 McLaughlin Street, 20 Orlando Street, 138 Roma Avenue, 131 Cedar Grove Avenue. This is the part of the build it back.
Right, okay, and so we were asked to decide on only 287-14BZ and adjourn the others, right?
Oh, really? Which address is 287?
No, sorry?
Roma.
Which address is 287?
Yeah.
Roma.
That's
I think
Roma
it's Roma.
Avenue?
I think it's Roma.
Yeah, Roma, 138 Roma.
Oh, so they don't want any comments on any of the others?
No, probably, do
They
we
may
need to
change.
do the comments on those? No, maybe not, so we can hold off on those and just have comments on Roma. So, there's some things that just need to be corrected. The text said that a side yard waiver was required for minimum distance between buildings. Drawing shows one side yard probably complies, but not sure if well, I know there's no survey, so maybe that's not an issue. The front yard of 14'6" measured from the street widening line is okay. The existing building had no front yard and was built past the street widening. Okay, yeah, I'm okay with this one, actually.
My question was just, why don't they provide the 18-foot front yard? They can just push the building back a little bit. And I believe they have 2 parking spaces. It's very hard to see on the ground floor. It's very hard to see on the plan with the
No, actually, I
stippling.
think with those, they're not two parking spaces. They have room for two cars, but they don't need to have two parking spaces, if that's,
I know they don't need it,
Yeah.
but I know from my experience living in Staten Island, being zoning compliant, even if it's not required, is very important.
right, okay, yes, okay. Okay. Any other
That's just my opinion.
comments? Okay.
Item number 9, 291-14BZ through 314A. This is also Build It Back, 19 Millbelt Road, 23 Neutral Avenue, 58 Seafoam Avenue, 6 and 28 Topping Street, Staten Island.
And similarly, though not as extremely, they want a determination on 293-14, 294-14A, 295-BZ, and 296A,
Right.
but adjourn the others.
Do you know what addresses those are?
Yeah, hold on, 293, sorry.
Is moving.
Okay, hold on a second. So it's, Millbank is 293-14BZ, 294-14A, because it's a GCL waiver also. And, no, I'm sorry, Millbank is 292. So I didn't review that, okay, I didn't know that. Okay, so they also want 19 Millbank Road. So, and Neutral Avenue is 293-14, 294-14. And then, which is it, 295 is Seafoam Avenue.
Okay.
So I didn't have any comments about Neutral Avenue, but on Seafoam, I'm just noting that the house is only lifted 3'6", which is, kind of a relief. But and that there's no parking provided because the existing house had none. I'm just wondering whether the front yard at the existing house was approximately 8 feet, and I'm wondering whether this house can move forward to increase the rear yard depth, because we're talking about only a 7'6" rear yard, which seems very small. The adjacent house has no front yard, and most houses on the block are close to the street, and this is only a one-story house, so if it could be moved forward.
My comments on Neutral Avenue was that this is a wide lot, and I didn't see why they didn't move the building 3 feet west and remove the waiver for the 8-foot distance between buildings. Because it's a 40-foot wide lot. For 58 Seafoam, I realize that there's no parking shown on the plans, but there's plenty of room in the side yard. Didn't see why they didn't provide the parking spaces. And that's all we're looking at for these. Okay.
And we have-
Also, for Millbank and Neutral, according to lower density growth management regulations, zoning regulation 2344A14 subsection 3 permits parking in the front yard where there's a parking space accessed beyond the street wall. And I just felt that that was a way to provide a second space in the front yard of those two homes.
So to be able to provide a second parking space?
Right. Again, just because
People-
community boards in Staten Island like to say, like to see things that are zoning compliant.
But we're not waiving the parking. They're complying with the parking requirement, is my understanding.
No, they're only providing one space for Millbank. Well, there's actually, if you go by the grandfather
Right,
situation, there was no parking.
right.
But if they're going to state that these buildings are zoning compliant, it's not a requirement, I would say. But if they're going to show two spaces, there are ways to show two spaces. And one is to have one under the building, which they show, and the other one is to have one in the front yard, I believe.
Okay. Okay. All right, any other comments?
Item number 10, 303 through 307, 14BZ, 1032 and 1034 Olympia Boulevard, 296 Adams Avenue, 156 Baden Place, 540 Hunter Avenue, Staten Island.
Okay, with respect to these, we were asked to review 303, 304, 305, and 306. So that's both on Olympia Boulevard, Adams Avenue, and Baden Place. Yeah, so only leaving out Hunter Avenue. So I think these have open issues. That's why they want to adjourn those. Okay. My basic question really on all of these, actually the ones that we spoke about before also, is when you look at the streetscape information, the surrounding neighborhood, everything has a garage door, you know? It's like many of the houses exist on sort of the upper level, and then there's the garage underneath. It's sort of a standard typology. And all of these houses leave the garage completely open, and then there's some kind of enclosure around it, and I don't know what that enclosure is at the garage level. Is it mesh? Is it lattice? Like, what's the material? I'd like to understand what that is. But I'm not getting why there's no way to close these garages. Like for instance, if it's mesh or lattice, like why can't it be some sort of a thing on a hinge? It's a very, very simple thing on a hinge. It doesn't have to be an automatic garage door or anything like that. It's just to conceal all the junk that people keep in their garages. Because most of the time garages are the least attractive thing, and then you're imposing this unattractive thing to everyone on the street. And I think it's a bad beginning. Anyway, so then my problem with really most of these was that there are 2 parking spaces shown, one of which sticks out into the driveway in the weirdest way. It's like parked halfway inside the garage and halfway out. Again, when this is an area where 2 spaces are required, and I don't think that that's a solution. And the thing that is preventing both cars from fitting underneath the house, which is a prototype, is this wet storage area at the back. So, which is effectively a shed, and I know that there's plumbing that goes through it, but I know that the plumbing seems to be unrelated to the wet wall above. It's not like it's always underneath the kitchen, for example. Sometimes it's under a bedroom. So I don't understand why that wet storage area can't be shoved back. And then, granted, it needs to have a roof, so with a roof, and then you can fit the parking completely underneath the house. Because I think it's just a bad way to begin a prototype where you've got all of these cars that are neither here nor there, and they will be parked there and they will be like that. And I just don't think that that's the right way to go. Let's see, with respect to this one, there were a lot of mistakes between the zoning sheets. This is true on many of them. So there were mistakes on the zoning sheets between the BSA zoning sheets and the statement of facts, where the zoning sheet would say there's a non-complying, for instance, front yard, whereas the statement of facts doesn't mention it. And so since in all cases where you've got parking underneath the house, you have to have an 18-foot front yard, then that's one of the waivers that's required. I note that the existing house had no front yard and it continued past the street widening. And it shows that And then I learned, the drawings are actually kind of confusing with respect to this subject of the what you're allowed to do to move the building back. The zoning sheet shows that the existing house had a 20-foot-9 rear yard, but the drawing seems to indicate that it has no rear yard, but I understand that that's not actually a drawing of the existing building. It's a drawing of how far back you're allowed to push the house to compensate for the staircase. It's very hard to understand that. So where it's not necessary to show compensation for the staircase, that gray area should be taken out. And where it is necessary to show it, then it needs to be rendered in some other kind of very visibly different shading system or graphic, because it's very hard to understand what's existing versus what's just the permissible pushback. So, and I think my comments are the same on, I think on all of these. This is these 2 parking spaces, kind of, with Adams Avenue, though, the depth of Lopion Street is too shallow. Yeah, the problem with Adams Avenue is that the depth of the property beyond the street widening is very shallow. So this is a big problem that's ongoing with these street widenings, where they have to measure from the street widening line back instead of from the property line. And we really need to get DOT in on this act so we're not forced to deal with that kind of relationship, because the building really should be pulled back. Or could be pulled forward, is what I mean. Could be pulled forward to compensate for a lot of these problems. Anyway, those are my comments. Anybody?
No, I had no comments on these. They were fine.
Oh, and wait a minute, Hunter Avenue was one of those, right? No, 306?
Well, it's not being
No,
considered.
307 is off, okay. Okay.
Item number 11, 308 through 312, 14BZ, also build it back, 178, 179 Kiswick Street, 5565 Hempstead Avenue, and 297 Colony Avenue in Staten Island.
Okay, so we were asked to adjourn all but 309-14, which is 55 and 65 Hempstead. And I didn't have any issues with this one. Anybody else?
I have none.
No.
This concludes the executive session for December 15th, 2014. Thank you. Maybe it might be easier to put a number next to each of the houses.
Yeah.
I think we should, yeah.